Okay, welcome everyone. I'm incredibly excited to get into my first video review with Cosmo, handled by the amazing Ariana. So, really pleased straight away with the way that Cosmo takes over from the start article, in this case, a small set of keys. And the initial movement straight forward sort of says to me that Cosmo likely did have odor. However, as we'll see here, we have a very strong change in behavior where Cosmo pauses, lifts her head up just there, and you can quickly tell that Cosmo has run out of odor and they're not entirely sure what to do about it. Now, there's a few things to discuss here, and Denise quite rightly points out in the footage to not follow Cosmo at this point in time because Denise, and you can probably tell yourself, that Cosmo does have no odor. The body language, the sort of lost feeling, lack of working, all these sorts of things point to the fact that Cosmo is a bit uncertain, has no odor to work with. So we don't want to reinforce that by following them blindly. Now here, Cosmo comes back to say hello to Denise. This is pretty common, especially in the sort of earlier stages in our tracking journey where dogs like to come back and check out the people following behind them. But they do, over time, learn pretty quickly that the person they can see and smell that's following close behind is not going to reward them or pay them any attention. And it's a behavior that fairly extinguishes fairly readily over time. Now here, the big deep sniff, again, Denise is spot on here, having a good signpost sniffing session. Now, I would have corrected Cosmo much earlier on. The body language was really clear from the moment they sniffed that tree that they were sniffing essentially distraction odor, which we want to be pouncing on immediately so that we don't allow the dog to self-reinforce for following and paying attention to distraction odors. Great, so the next couple of minutes of footage, understandably frustrating at this stage of training. So Cosmo's got no odor to work with, so therefore you're seeing very little in the way of hunting behavior, intensity, or any type of body language that would indicate that Cosmo has any odor to work with. Now, when we read this type of behavior, we don't want to reinforce it by following it. And I understand in the moment that can be quite confusing. So Denise does the right thing by sort of calling out not to follow Cosmo anymore, and absolutely empathize with the sort of, so what do you do then, right, is sort of the question here. The answer is, several points to the answer. One, we're definitely going to be looking at training in alternative locations, which we'll talk about certainly a bit more towards the end of the video about what I think we should be doing next in terms of goal setting and track design. But also, too, what we'll also address here is just really want to reinforce that when we see the dog has a significant change of behavior, there's always a lot of questions we need to ask ourselves. But in this particular case, the real crux of it is that there's no odor, and therefore Cosmo is offering nothing in terms of body language that indicates that they have odor. And so what we want to do is exactly what you're doing here, shorten the leash up, and we want to return back to where you last had discernible body language that indicated that the dog had odor. So, like everything in tracking, there is a number of ways to go about cutting a track or recovering a track or whatever nomenclature people like to use. And Denise, on the whole, in her approach, has her own methodology, which I don't fundamentally disagree with. But what I would like to offer is a way that I like to train the cutting of the track and trying to recover it and give the dog the best chance of picking up the track once more. And what that looks like is I actually do not give the dog a leash length until they're showing me that they have odor. What does that mean? It means I would have the leash about maybe 2 meters long at most. And the dog can be pulling to my left, to my right, or in front of me. It's irrelevant. What is relevant is that I, as the handler, dictate where we're going to work and walk, and give the dog the opportunity to show me that they've picked up the track again. And you can do that in a systematic way. You can do that in a circle. You can do that in a box. You can do it in cardinal points. There's many different ways of conducting search patterns. But the key element is that I'm watching the dog a short distance away from me and I'm dictating where we're walking. That way the dog can't, ghost track on me, because oftentimes you'll see it where if you're walking along and the dog will sort of maybe pay attention to something, and then you get excited and you let the leash go and you let them flow out, then what you'll see is, and you just saw it a moment ago, by the way, as well, you'll see the dog go out to that full leash length. You get really excited, you go, oh my goodness, they're going out, they've got energy, they're going in a direction, and then they get to the end of the leash, and by the way, your handling is really nicely here, that you're not jerking the leash, and then you'll see that they've actually got nothing. The behavior fizzles out into nothing, they have no change of behavior or consistency that indicates that they have odor, and then you're left going, well, what do I do? And it all comes back to cutting the track, and if they don't get it, if they don't pick it up after I've conducted a bit of a search pattern over an area where the track is most likely, then you can call it a day, and that way you're not wasting your time. These are just some key things to think about in future. Here again we see Cosmo coming back to distraction odor again, which again I'd be much faster at telling the dog to leave it, so that we're not allowing the dog to self-reinforce. So I just want to take a moment to talk about the location which you're training. Now, understandably, tracking areas are not easy to come by, and in particular areas that are lacking in significant contamination. Now, the spot you've chosen to work in here on this particular day is definitely like a bit of a thoroughfare for dogs and people. You can tell by just the sheer proximity you are to housing here that there would certainly be a significant amount of contamination in this area, which is almost certainly really too much for Cosmo at this stage of training. This level of contamination is really too much for any dog until they're quite a little bit more advanced, and certainly not until they fully understand when you give them the leave it command that they need to leave it, which is a type of training that you need to do separately and very deliberately, so that the dog understands that, or believes that you're omniscient, and when you tell them to leave it, that, oh, they know that I'm onto distraction here and I best leave it before I face any further consequences. So again, we see Cosmo sort of just going for a bit of a walk here. No discernible changes of behavior that indicate that they have track. And something you've got to be really cautious of in terms of standing our ground, there's a bit of nuance to it in that, I'm not one to suggest that, especially if you're working a known track, for example, that you always just stand your ground, even if you know that the dog is wrong. There could be blown odor that's blown outside of a corner, for example, and the dog needs to work those problems out. So certainly what I'm about to say next is not a hard and fast applies to every situation type answer. But what I would offer is that we have to be really judicious and thoughtful about how much we're standing still when we're working a dog. Now, in this particular corner here, Cosmo's gone under the leash, and we've stood still, no change of behavior, which indicates there was no track, and now they've come back and they've gone past us. And again, there's not much change of behavior here. There's a little bit, maybe there's a bit of odor now that Cosmo's following, which was good. But before Cosmo had even picked up on any track at all, which was very subtle anyway, we already started walking, and so therefore we're already laying the foundations for, if you're wrong, I'm going to stand still, and if I know you're right, I'm going to start walking no matter what it is you show me in terms of your behavior. This is looking a lot more promising here, which is really nice. But again, it's really patchy, which I would put down mostly to the likely contamination that Cosmo's having to work through. So again, not to sound like a broken record or to be too critical, but I would really offer that we want to work in areas that are a bit more, a bit less contaminated, so they're a bit easier for Cosmo to isolate the odor and work through it. Now, pooping on the track is always fun, but I'll just take a moment to talk very seriously about pooping on tracks. It depends on the dog, but I've seen everything from dogs who do a poo and then utterly forget what it is they're doing, like a system reboot almost, for the next 1, 2, 3. I've seen dogs forget what they're doing for 5 minutes as I give them space to sort of get back to work. But in this case here, it's really nice to see that Cosmo does their poop and then gets back to work. So that's actually a really good thing. And I also wanted to just offer that. It was really good that you give Cosmo the space to do the poop at the end of the leash so that they don't feel crowded. And therefore, as soon as they finish pooping, what you'll see if people have crowded the dog will then charge forward to get away from the handler. So really, really nice work. Sustain that handling there that you should remain at the end of the leash when they do a poop. Now, another thing to consider in terms of selecting our tracking locations and where we have our track layers walk is that dogs and tracks and roads and footpaths and sort of those linear features that are man-made and even animal tracks out in the bush, these are things that often dogs within the foundation stages default to following. It's quite an advanced thing to have a dog that can track along a track and still stay on the odor that they're meant to be on. There's a reason why rural certifications, where we will do tracking in the bush and then we'll have a segment of the track on a physical feature such as this or a road or a footpath, are actually quite difficult because the dogs have a natural tendency to just see it and just get very optimistic and follow along it. I have a strong feeling that this is what has happened a lot on this track here, that Cosmo has hit this physical man-made feature and they're just following along it for the most part. Now, my intent here is not to sound like a broken record, but I really do want to take every opportunity I can throughout the video to just call out exactly what it is I see. Now, here is another excellent example of distraction odor, whether it be another dog or another animal or a person or whatever that's walked along here that Cosmo wants to mark over the top of. And again, as soon as you see that behavior where their sort of nose burrows into the ground, the tail drops down, their body language sort of flattens out, you really want to be on top of them and telling them to leave it. You don't want to allow them to be marking things as we're going along. It just creates really bad habits and allows the dog to think that they can do whatever they want and they can pay attention to whatever it is that they want along a track, which is just something we really want to avoid inculcating in our dog as we're developing. So this next part of the track here is something that I really like to be very cautious of when I'm working a dog. Now, whenever I see a dog lose odor, and again, this is just school according to Jeremy here, I do not like to give a additional command to track. I find I've seen it before where dogs have been given this additional command to track at the wrong time when they've been out of odor, and if the dog is quite good at understanding the command, you're effectively instructing the dog to follow whatever it is they're smelling at that point in time. If they're following anything at all. So be very, very cautious of that one, and it's one that I would recommend not doing. For me, it's all about the dog's independence and their independent decision-making processes and problem solving that I want to be rewarding. So in this case here, I don't like to tell the dog to track again. And we'll also see a continuation here of Cosmo wanting to follow the physical feature instead of any odor that they're following, because just here to the left there is, that's not the track. You can tell from the overlay that the track layer here is actually gone to the right. So you see Cosmo looking back at you, looking quite confused and uncertain, and also too we can't see any consistent body language. We see again distraction right here once more. So whenever I'm seeing a continuous repeated distraction behavior, it tells me a few things. One, the area is potentially too contaminated for what the dog is currently able to handle. It also tells me that the dog is not understanding the required task of scent discrimination, and that also it doesn't understand that it's doing the wrong thing. So something to be very, very cautious of what we're doing here. So in terms of reading Cosmo's body language, this is a really good opportunity to talk about a few things. So number one, just here, Cosmo's defaulted again to the man-made track just here. And also too, all of their body language tells you quite clearly that they are completely out of odor and they've got nothing to work with. And we see a bit more distraction in just a moment here as well. I like to refer to this often as as a dog, excuse me, as a dog who lacks direction, lacks intensity, lacks consistency. And when you put all those together, you can quickly make a rapid assessment that the dog is out of odor and they've got nothing to work with. What we do not want to do is follow a dog when they are displaying these behaviors, as they clearly have nothing to work with, and we don't want to reinforce failure or come so far off the track that it's unrecoverable. Again, here we see as well Cosmo default to more of the man-made track here. So whilst their energy picks up, it's just because of the slight increase in optimism that you get when a dog hits a man-made track, especially when they're out of odor, as they look. I don't have a canine psychological explanation for it, but it's just something I've seen time and time again, where you see them just follow tracks along, especially when they're out of odor, what I like to call tracking on hopes and dreams. Again, more crittering there, again, more detecting on distraction odor, again indicating that this is just too much of a highly contaminated location for Cosmo to be working in. So here we have a nice change of behavior where Cosmo's intensity picks right up, where they've actually hit upon the track layer's odor, which is very exciting. It causes them to get very pumped up. However, for whatever reason, Cosmo comes off the track over to the right here, and we'll see the body language change where they've run out of odor and they'll pause, they lift their head up just like that, and they've run out of odor. Now, in this particular instance, what I would have done is I would have shortened the leash up and brought them back to the left, to give them a chance to recover the track that they've just picked up on. Okay, so there's just a couple of things I want to talk about now, just towards the end of the track. Now, the first one is when we're tracking along with our dog and we have people following us, in this case, the amazing Denise, what I would suggest is you really need to have your track layer follow fairly close behind you. This becomes quite apparent as we get closer to the water in the encampment up further ahead, as dogs are pretty clever and they will quickly game future tracks where they'll understand that whilst you may not know where the track is, the person following may, and their physical presence will indicate to the dog what the correct direction is. So you really want to avoid having the person following hang back so far that it shows the dog that they're wrong and that they should be coming back to them to then pick up the track. It's almost it's a very subtle way of helping a dog, but once a dog figures that out, it's quite a useful tool for the animal to cheat and not actually work very hard. So keep that in mind in the future. I understand physical limitations are a thing, and if it can't be helped, it can't be helped. But where it can be helped, definitely try and have the people following stay as close to you as much as possible. But I'm no fool, and I know that can be very difficult. But just as like a general remark and in principle approach, I would recommend having the people follow you. Now, the next thing as well I'll talk about is surface types. So towards the end here, and throughout this track, to be honest with you, a lot of it has been very difficult, well compacted flat earth surface, which is actually quite difficult for a dog of Cosmo's experience to work really well. That combined with the distraction odors throughout the track really made this an extremely difficult track for Cosmo, and in my opinion, far above what they're currently able to reasonably be expected to do. And I would certainly recommend finding a location that is significantly less contaminated, if possible, in your area. So I've just sped up the next bit here where Cosmo makes their way up to an encampment and goes for a bit of a drink in the water up here. Again, this is certainly a location that I would be telling the dog, especially if it's a known track. In this case, you know that your track layer is not in those campsites. I'd be telling the dog to leave it and moving off those rather quickly, as you know that your track layer is not in there. Now, as we move along here, what we'll see in just a moment is that Cosmo will make their way over to Denise and get quite distracted. Now, I just want to talk about using, again, the command to get back to work versus giving a additional tracking command such as Zook. Now, for me, I really like to separate these two things. One, my tracking command, whatever that is, Zook, Chercher, find them, is only delivered at the very beginning of the track when the dog is taking odor from the scent article. From there, what I'll give the dog typically is a different verbiage, such as get back to work, which is their sort of almost obedience command of, hey, what you're on is wrong, and I want you to get back to the odor that I originally told you to get working. Now, my only concern with giving an additional zoot command for Cosmo here is that essentially Cosmo's gone in a direction, they've come off, they've come out to Denise, they've been told off, and they get told to track again. And my only concern is that potentially Cosmo may be taking that tracking command as almost a move out in front of you command to move forward and not actually tracking. Now here they get lucky and they get extremely surprised by the track layer. Now it's fairly warm, and at 20 minutes the odor pool would have been quite big from your track layer here. So, you know, again, I don't think Cosmo was really working too well on this one, and they were not really on the track layer's odor for most of the track. Okay, so a lot to unpack and digest in that video, quite a long one. Number one, I would separate my commands, so I'd have a start command when they sniff the scent article, such as Zook in your case. And then I have an additional command, which is usually along the lines of leave it, which is, you know, they're smelling a distraction area that you don't want to leave. You need to be a lot faster on recognizing that and telling them off. Hopefully, after watching this video, you'll be able to see all of that back in slow time and recognize what Cosmo looks like when they are distracted. They're fairly easy to see, especially after you watch the video. The next point I would offer is working in a significantly less contaminated environment. Now, don't get me wrong, anywhere you work in this country on Earth is going to have a level of contamination. However, working on a suburban periphery where there's certainly dogs walking along those tracks, marking all the way along it, is just a bridge too far right now for Cosmo, and is truly actually quite an advanced problem for a dog to be solving. Additionally, selecting an environment that has a lot more bushland, if you will, and significantly less tracks and so on for Cosmo to be working will enable them to learn a lot better to scent discriminate and not come off and just follow tracks in the blind hope that that'll lead to success. In terms of what I'd like to see next, I would really love to see a off-leash modified fire trail. So have person show Cosmo that they've got the reward, then have them move away, then have Cosmo come up to the start point, the scent article, and then drop leash and give Cosmo an opportunity to work independently to solve those problems. I really like to work off leash until I see extremely reliable and highly energized dogs who are able to solve these problems before we introduce the human component and the handling. Once we introduce the human at the end of the leash, then we introduce a lot more problems just due to the inherent fact that we're slowing the dog down. We have feedback that comes through the leash, and we have the subtle influence that comes with our presence on a track. So we really want to have a dog that's fully capable of independently working before we have the human attached to the dog.